The air was thick with humidity as I stepped outside, the smoke from my cigarette curling lazily in the pre-dawn darkness. The faint glow of the city, usually omnipresent, had been swallowed by the power outage left in the wake of Hurricane Ida. The smell of wet concrete mixed with mildew from the shelter's old walls. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. Each gust of wind carried an unsettling vibration, as though the storm had shaken loose something that had been buried beneath the city for far too long. Only the low hum of the shelter's generator and the eerie chorus of frogs filled the silence, their unrelenting croaks echoing through the abandoned streets of New. I had worked nights at the homeless shelter behind Charity Hospital for months. The building was an imposing presence, its shadowed windows and crumbling facade a haunting reminder of the destruction left by Katrina years ago. I had heard stories, whispers of spirits and strange occurrences, but I had always dismissed them. Superstition, I told myself, was a way to fill the void of unease. One of the shelter's residents, an old man named Solomon, claimed he used to work at the hospital. He told stories of the nurses who disappeared during the night shifts, their cries echoing in the empty halls. He spoke in cryptic riddles, like he was trying to warn me without directly saying the truth. They didn't leave girl, he'd whisper late at night. They stayed behind, waiting for someone to listen. Yet, as I stood there, gazing up at the hospital's towering silhouette, something caught my eye. A flickering light emanated from one of the windows on the second to top floor. It wasn't the steady, warm glow of a flashlight or lantern. No, this was erratic, unnatural, like the static of an old black and white television. The room it illuminated seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a dim, ghostly rhythm that sent chills crawling up my spine. The broken glass on some of the windows seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the flickering light, and I could swear I saw faint, shadowy shapes moving just out of view, as though they were avoiding my gaze. A cold dread crept over me, an inexplicable feeling that I wasn't supposed to be watching. I squinted, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe someone brought a generator up there, I muttered under my breath. But the thought was absurd. The hospital had been abandoned for years, its interior gutted and decrepit. The stairs were treacherous at best, and hauling a generator up multiple flights would be near impossible. The light flickered on and off, then on again, casting strange shadows that danced across the glass. They seemed to twist unnaturally, contorting into shapes that resembled clawed hands or gaping mouths. I felt a prickling sensation, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I took another drag of my cigarette, my fingers trembling slightly, and tried to shake off the unease. Just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. The storm, the long hours, the tension, they were all conspiring to feed my imagination. As the minutes ticked by, the flickering persisted. It didn't waver or fade, as a malfunctioning light might. Instead, it seemed deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to be seen. Then the light didn't just flicker anymore. It pulsed, each flash like a heartbeat, as though the hospital itself was alive, breathing in the darkness. And the shadows, no longer confined to the glass, began to spill into the street, elongating like dark fingers reaching out. Waiting for me to take a step closer, I found myself transfixed, my gaze locked on the window. The darkness surrounding me felt heavier, oppressive, as if the night itself were pressing down, threatening to smother me. The sound of footsteps behind me broke the spell. I turned sharply, my heart leaping into my throat, but it was just one of the shelter's older residents, shuffling out for a smoke of his own. The man, weary and weathered, followed my line of sight to the window. "Oh, you see it too, huh?" the man said, his voice gravelly but calm, as if discussing the weather. "See what?" I asked, my voice tinged with nerves. "The ghost," the man replied nonchalantly. "Been there for years, since before Katrina. Folks say it's a nurse, stuck here, trying to help the ones she couldn't save. Don't bother her, and she won't bother you. I stared at the man, trying to gauge if he was serious or just messing with me. But the older man's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the flickering light. Ghosts don't exist, I muttered, more to myself than to the man. The man shrugged, taking a long drag from his cigarette. Believe what you want, kid. Doesn't change what's there. As the sky began to lighten, the flickering dimmed and then disappeared entirely, swallowed by the dawn. I stayed outside a while longer, smoking in silence, my eyes still fixed on the now dark window. The rational part of me insisted there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection, or a vagrant who somehow managed to haul a TV up there. But deep down, a nagging doubt festered. I didn't mention the incident to anyone at work. They were used to my quiet, no-nonsense demeanor, and I didn't want to sound crazy, not after all the hours I'd spent convincing myself there was a perfectly rational explanation. But that weekend, when I met up with my friends, I couldn't help myself. We were sitting around at a dive bar near the quarter, the usual crowd of faces filling the space, most of them familiar, but none of them real friends, just people I had spent too much time with over the years. I took a deep drink from my beer, staring down at the dark liquid swirling in my glass. "You seem off," my friend Eric said, his voice low, concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I half laughed, trying to brush it off, but the words got stuck in my throat. I remembered the light, the flickering, unnatural light, and the chilling feeling that had crawled down my spine when I saw it. "I think I might have," I said, finally, voice rough. Eric raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" I explained what had happened, how I'd seen the light, how it had moved like it had a life of its own, how it wasn't just a broken bulb or a malfunctioning generator. I told him about the shadows, the feeling of being watched, and how the old man at the shelter had talked about the ghost of the nurse. When I finished, the table fell unnervingly silent. My friends exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. "Well, I don't know if you're messing with me," Eric said slowly, "but Charity Hospital's been haunted for years. Everyone knows that." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? How is that even possible?" "It's been abandoned for years." "No, man," he said, shaking his head. "It wasn't always abandoned. After the storm, people came back in there, trying to salvage stuff, and that's when the weird shit started. Some of the workers who went to nurses, construction crews, they swore they saw stuff. Ghosts. A nurse wandering the halls, helping people who weren't even there. Some of them didn't come out. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe they were just trying to mess with me, but the weight in their eyes stopped me. There was no sarcasm, no playful smirk. They were serious. They knew something I didn't. You've heard of it, right?" Sarah, another friend, chimed in. "The stories, the rumors. Everyone who grew up here has heard them. They say the hospital still remembers the people it couldn't save, like it's keeping them there, trapped in some pocket of time. And that nurse? She never left." I rubbed my eyes, suddenly feeling very tired. "You're all telling me this is just common knowledge?" "Yeah," Eric replied, his voice flat. "So, I started, my mind struggling to keep up. You're telling me there's a ghost?" Sarah's gaze darkened, and she leaned in close, lowering her voice. "It's not just any ghost. They say you don't see her unless she wants you to. You're lucky, though, that you just saw the light and not something worse." "Worse?" I asked, my heart suddenly thudding in my chest. Eric nodded. "I heard someone say once that the hospital chooses who it wants to come back. It doesn't care who you are or what you've done. If it's interested in you, it gets to you. The words settled over me like a cold wave. I felt my skin prickle. So what? I'm supposed to just ignore it? You can try, Eric said, half smiling. But once you see it, it's like a tether's been tied to you. The light, the nurse, it'll keep calling you back, drawing you in. Eventually, you'll go inside, whether you want to or not. I swallowed hard, a lump rising in my throat. You guys aren't serious, are you? This is just superstition. It's not real. Sarah leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing as though she was studying me. You want to believe it's not real. I get it, but you're wrong. The stories are real, and you've already started seeing the signs. You can try to push it down, but trust me, you can't. The more you try to ignore it, the more you'll find yourself thinking about it. And then one day, you'll wake up and realize you've been listening to the whispers all along. My stomach twisted. I wanted to argue, to laugh, but something deep inside me had already started to believe them. The doubt that had been simmering in the back of my mind since I first saw the light began to boil over. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The flickering light had taken root in my mind, and every time I closed my eyes, I could see it. I could feel its presence, like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. The next day, I passed by Charity Hospital again. My gaze was instinctively drawn to that second-floor window. The light wasn't there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just waiting. Watching. Waiting for me to return. Their certainty unsettled me. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation, but every rational argument I came up with crumbled under the weight of their conviction. They spoke of the hospital as though it had a soul of its own, fractured and trapped, its remnants bleeding through the cracks of reality. The rest of the shift passed uneventfully, but the image of that flickering light stayed with me. Weeks later, I found myself searching online for stories about Charity Hospital, about unexplained phenomena or ghost sightings. What I found unsettled me further: reports of strange lights, shadowy figures, and voices echoing in the empty halls. Some of the stories were vague, but the themes were consistent. People who had dared to enter the hospital after hours spoke of cold spots, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. A few even mentioned hearing footsteps, as though someone was walking behind them, though when they turned around, no one was there. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. What if there was something to these stories? What if the light I had seen wasn't just a trick of the mind, but something more, something that had been left behind when the hospital was abandoned? Something that could never leave because it had never found peace? I tried to push these thoughts aside, to focus on the mundane tasks of my job at the shelter. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept drifting back to Charity Hospital. I started to notice things during my shifts, the way the wind seemed to pick up as I stood outside, the way the shadows in the alley would stretch unnaturally long in the dim light. The more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent the feeling became, like a presence just out of sight, lurking in the corners of my mind. One night, after a particularly exhausting shift, I found myself standing outside once again. The shelter was quiet, the streets even quieter. The storm had passed, but the air still carried a dampness that clung to my skin. I had just lit a cigarette when I saw it again, the flickering light in the window. I froze, the cigarette forgotten between my fingers. The light danced like it had before, erratic and unnatural, casting strange shadows on the cracked glass. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, transfixed, but it felt like hours. Something inside me, the same something that had made me avoid that window in the past, urged me to leave, to turn away and forget it. But I couldn't. I stepped closer to the shelter's back door, moving slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows in the window shifted again, twisting into new forms. I could see them now almost clearly. Clawed hands, gaping mouths, faces contorted in pain or fear. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I had to look away, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the flickering light. I knew I was in danger of seeing something I couldn't unsee, something that might change everything I thought I knew about the world. The voice broke the silence, sharp and clear, coming from behind me. "Don't go in there, young lady." I whirled around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. Only the empty street and the faint hum of the shelter's generator. I stood still, frozen, my body tense, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The voice was gone, leaving only the faintest echo in my ears. My gaze returned to the window. The light was gone now, swallowed by the night. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't rationalize it. But I knew, deep down, that I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. And I knew that whatever it was, it hadn't wanted me to see it. The next morning, the flickering light was gone, and with it, my resolve to dismiss the strange occurrences at Charity Hospital. But as I stood there, the same nagging feeling gripped me, one I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. Every time I stepped outside for a smoke, every time I passed by the hospital, I couldn't help but glance up at that second-floor window. And every time I found myself wondering, was it really gone? Or had it simply gone silent, waiting for the next person to notice?